Due to the need of men in World War II, the role of women in society was transformed. World War II created a quick absence of males in the workforce which forcibly enabled women to be pushed forth into the workforce to take over the duties and jobs that the men previously held. Without men able to fill these factory positions, it was unsure whether or not companies were going to be able to continue to succeed until women began to rise to the occasion. The shift in labor completely redefined what it meant to be a woman and also showed the world just how strong and efficient women could be, proving that they could fact and function outside the kitchen. Prior to World War II, women were quiet, quite literally put and kept in a box. This box being the social standards that women were supposed to follow, or more literally, their physical home. Most women prior to the war were raised to marry, have children, and take care of the home. While this is not easy, it was not expected of women to do more than build a stable home and a social status, nor did most men ever think it was possible for a woman to step into their shoes. Emily Young's Our Mother's War does an incredible job capturing how this war allowed for women to break through the walls of their home and social boundaries and submerge themselves in nearly every aspect of society. Young's mother recounts that as soon as it was known that the president had declared war, all the boys who are eligible for the draft are just waiting to be called. It was no secret that soon many men would be drafted and sent off to fight for their country. But just how many men would go overseas was vaster than anyone could imagine. Companies were losing more and more of their main workforce with every draft, and soon the government was calling on any able-bodied individual to come and fill the labor gap, with many American women having to watch their breadwinners go overseas. Money was a large incentive for this opportunity to break into the workforce. The women who stepped up and took these open positions, some as nurses, some as manufacturers in factories, were becoming known as the soldiers without guns. Yellen's mother describes how the ideology of women changed almost every night. Suddenly, the standard idea of seeing women as a fragile creatures ill-suited for work outside the home, much less for hard labor, seemed peacetime luxury. While this thought of entering the workforce and doing hard labor was scary for many women, they knew it had to be done for the sake of their families as well as their country. They also knew that that whatever they would be doing, they would be facing these new challenges together. There were much propaganda surrounding women entering the workforce, most of it as a call to action, but also a show of propaganda of support from the government, as well as companies who would not be able to function without women to make up for their missing manpower. There is, of course, one piece of pro-woman in workforce propaganda that most everyone is familiar with: Rosie the Riveter. Rosie wore a red bandana, a denim overalls, and stood with one arm fixed, the caption, "We can do it." Rosie inspired these women to want to do well in hard-working conditions, and they believed that their contribution to the war would bring it to a quicker end. Women pushed themselves to their limit, working in less than ideal conditions for less than the ideal pay, some even raising and caring for families on top of that. While Rosie was a factory worker herself, as were most women who worked at the time, she was a metaphor and an inspiration for women who took up any job during these desperate times. This was the time for women to prove themselves, and they were not about to waste it. Rosie was a fictional character, but her impact was real, as her message continues to inspire women around the world, telling them that they can do hard work and break boundaries. All women who entered the workforce during this time were referred to as Rosies. Though they didn't understand at the time, their impact of the future's women's rights and careers was monumental. These women worked tirelessly for close to 6 years, putting their best effort forth, doing what they felt was necessary to ensure that their husbands fathers, brothers, sons, and friends arrived home safely from the war. This was a time where women gained exponential amounts of newfound independence. Nearly 11 months after D-Day, the war came to an end on September 2nd, 1945. Victory was celebrated long and hard, but the harrowing fact was that all the servicemen had now returned from war, ready and able to take back their old factory jobs. After the conclusion of World War II, women were no longer needed for companies to succeed, and many of them were left unemployed. Some women went back to work at hair salons as secretaries in the corporate world or found work elsewhere, but many of them never worked outside of their home again. This is not the reality women wanted for themselves. And studies have shown that in the 1950s, the employment of wives from middle-class families rose from 5 to 25%, and that between 1950 and 1960, the number of working wives quadrupled. Once women had experienced the freedom, emotional, physical, and financial that a working job provided them with, it was hard to just let it go so quickly. Women did not want to stop working after the war, but felt as though there were no longer a place or need for the contribution, which is what led to many developing conversations surrounding the women's rights movement. Women felt as though it was now clear that they could easily do any job a man could do, and that they should not have to wait to be called on in order to get a job. While homage was paid to all of the Rosies who aided to the workforce during the war, nothing would be satisfying as equal rights. These Rosies provided their worth at a critical time in history, which allowed for the beginning of a bigger conversation. Women's rights. It is because of these hardworking women that we now have the privilege of getting a college education and applying for any job we would like. This was not how things always worked. This is not to say that any woman who chooses to stay home with their family and not work is any less than a woman who does. But it is because of these women who continue to work that our right is secure but still not to be taken for granted. World War II drastically impacted the way that the world views women and how women view themselves, especially in a workplace setting. Though it would be a long journey before women were given greater opportunities and before the stereotype around women belonging in the kitchen would shift. This was a great place to start, begin that what would soon become a revolution.